It's like floating in a little rowboat on the surface of the ocean. If it's a nice calm day, you feel nice and calm. If it's not a nice calm day and it's choppy, you feel a little bit anxious. And if a hurricane comes, you're just in fear. You're tossed about by the waves and you're subject to all the stuff that comes. You're not aware of the fact that 20 feet down where you really live, everything is calm. But you're so up here on the surface, and that has become your entire world, that it's a hard life. That's tough.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. I've met some amazing folks on this joyful rebellion, and Bob Martin is one of the most interesting people I've met on my journey so far. If I read his full bio, let's just say my background music would run out long before his list of career highlights. Bob is a mix of things you might not expect to go together. He currently works as a professor of business law at Elon University, and he's also the Mindfulness Coordinator for the university. As a Taoist Buddhist Christian practitioner, Bob is committed to freeing people from the constraints of religious dogma and toward the path of virtue and self-discovery. We talk about his most recent book, I Am the Way, a Taoist Christian devotional that reflects Bob's commitment to bridging spiritual traditions and fostering unity and compassion among all beings. We also talk a lot about mindfulness and meditation and why creating a consistent practice has become so important to defend our minds from the information overload many of us experience in our daily lives. This conversation is packed full of wisdom and great information. I can't wait for you to hear it. So let's jump in. Bob Martin, thank you so much for being here on A Joyful Rebellion. When I read your profile, I read your bio, it's almost like those dice they use in some of the games. They have like 20 or 30 sides. They've got so many sides to them and so many facets, I guess you could call it. When I was just reading over your profile, I was like, wow, you've had a long career. You have been an attorney. You've been a social worker. You are a mindfulness advocate. And you really embody the joyful rebellion that I talk about because you took a shift from one into the other because you knew it was important. But on top of all of that, and let me read it so I don't get it wrong, but on top of that, you are a Taoist Buddhist Christian practitioner. And when I read that, my inner Southern Baptist upbringing was screaming, but Bob, you got to pick one. You got to pick one, Bob. You can only have one. And of course, I've left that programming behind, but man, it sure did rear its ugly head when I was thinking, wait, you can do that? So I would love to start there. How did you get to that point where you realized it was okay to integrate these different practices, these different ideologies, these different philosophies, and help them all live nicely together?
That's a great story, and I'll answer that in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you a little story.
Okay.
My wife, Connie, is I would call her at this point a recovering Southern Baptist, but nevertheless, she is a Bible literalist and remains so to today.
Okay.
She believes in the Garden of Eden and the rib, and she believes in Noah's Ark and all of these as historical facts. So we met, and in Buddhist terms, I would call her a bodhisattva. She's a saint. And we met on a work ethic. We worked together. We had a work ethic that was similar, and our values were identical. But our belief systems were very different. I would, at that point, call myself a Taoist Buddhist. And at that point, I also was a little bit low on organized religion generally. We got married, and she would be going off to church on Sunday morning. And one Sunday morning, she comes over to me, and I'm going to watch the news shows, and she's going to go to church. And she has these sad beagle eyes. and I said, honey, what's wrong? And she says, oh, it's just that I love you so much, and I hate it that you're not going to go to heaven with me. because I hadn't been.
Really pulled out the punches there.
And I said, well, I hate it that you're not going to be reincarnated with me. And she goes, oh, stop. It slaps me. That's the integration of these two things, which actually was we'll get to my book later, but I felt it was necessary for me to write some kind of like Rosetta Stone that would translate my belief system into her language.
Oh.
So I took the 81 chapters of the Tao Te Ching, which is the main basic book of Taoism, and started to translate it into Christian terminology. And eventually that's what resulted in my book, I Am the Way. Now, to answer your question, my folks were Eastern European immigrants, both of whose families were wiped out either by the Bolsheviks or the Nazis. My dad was Hungarian royalty. My mom was Roma Gypsy. And the story of between the Bolsheviks wiped out the royalty, everybody wiped out the Romans. They came to the conclusion there couldn't be a God. Although my father, he's one of those men that I put up on a pedestal. I have a hero's wall here in my office, and he's at the top of it. A very meticulous, very honorable man. And although we never went to any kind of church service and I was never indoctrinated with any kind of dogma, he said, you must go to Sunday school because you are an American. An American, you must know the Bible stories. He would take me to a Sunday school, drop me off. I would go in and I would hear about these things like the flood and Noah's Ark. And, you know, it was all kind of Disney to me. But there was one thing that they kept telling me, and no matter where I went, fortunately, they didn't fill me with fear, but they did teach me, and I accepted it, that there was this person, I'm not sure exactly what he was special though, and that he loved me. And that sank deep into me. And through all of the demons that I fought and all of the downtimes, I always had this feeling that somewhere up there, maybe between Saturn and Jupiter, there was this guy who loved me. And it abided with me throughout my life. So fast forward, now in my early 30s, I had worked as an economic crimes and consumer frauds prosecutor for Janet Reno back in Miami during the cocaine cowboy days. And we hit up the mob for a lot of money. And then I went out in private practice, and then the mob came to visit me and basically said, in order to hit us for that much, you got to be good. And they started sending me clients.
Okay.
So here I am, a mob lawyer in Miami during those years, and I'm maybe going out to too many chrome and glass bars, maybe doing some stuff I shouldn't have been doing. Married to my first wife, already had my house paid off at 32.
Yeah, in Miami.
But I'm bottoming out, and I'm seeing a therapist, and came to a real big crossroads, and I asked him, what should I do? And I was like determined to go forward. So he reaches behind him, and he picks up this bag with 3 Chinese coins in it. Shakes the coins, drops them, makes some calculations. And I'm thinking I'm paying this guy $65 an hour to throw coins. What is going on? And eventually he comes up with a number and reaches and gets a book and opens it up to that chapter number and shows it to me. And the title of the chapter is Retreat. So I cursed him out and stomped out, but the advice was the right advice. And so I pulled back from some things that I was going to do, and it saved me. So shortly thereafter, I asked him, tail between my legs, I crawled back to him. I say, what was that? And he says, that was the I Ching. Or sometimes you see I-C-H-I-N-G, I Ching. And Ching means classical book. Right. And I means changes. So the I Ching is the classical book of changes. It is a Taoist practice. Find out that my therapist was the English language editor for Master Watching Ni, who was a 72nd generation Taoist priest from the Shaolin Temple, who came to Miami and led a group. So I studied under George and Master Ni for 8 years. And that is where I became a Taoist. And the thing about it is that there's nothing in it that required me to have to believe in something supernatural, to believe in a deity. It was just an organized system of virtue and how to live a joyful life.
Okay, yeah.
And it was the first time I'd been introduced to anything like that. I took to it like a fish to water. It was just beautiful. And it changed who I was. A little while later, I ran into a little problem with my clients and had to leave Miami. So I moved to North Carolina, and there aren't any Taoists, not many in North Carolina. So I started attending a Buddhist temple. So
Yeah.
that, and I started meditating. That led to training as a meditation teacher. And all of this time, I still have this abiding sense that there is this dude, this Jesus guy who loves me. So I start to attend Christian churches, but many of them were conservative and they would have none of me. And then I met my wife, and we discovered the church that we're attending now, the United Church of Christ, which, as my pastor describes it, is the last car on the Trinitarian train.
Okay.
It's very liberal, and it handles my wife's very conservative view of things and mine, and it's big enough for both of us. So we found a spiritual home, and that's where we are.
That's really great. Moving from a place where a lot of people have a lot of different ideas and then moving to North Carolina, especially what year was that you moved to North Carolina?
1988.
Okay, so we're still in Reaganomics. We're saying no to drugs. We are very conservative. We hate Russia. We like back in 88. I remember 88, and I lived in North Carolina then too, and super conservative.
And it's crazy that those same people who hated Russia then, those same conservatives, are starting to love Russia now. Go figure.
It was more like the early to mid 80s. I just remember as a school kid being constantly afraid we were going to get bombed by Russia. That was the thing that was either Jesus was going to come back and the end of the world, or we were going to get bombed. Either way, sometime before the 90s, the world was going to end. And wow, guess that didn't happen. But here we are. So you came to North Carolina and you eventually found a church that would allow all of these ideas to come together. And second wife was open-minded, loved you for you, and not just you had to check the box of going to church and believing exactly what she believed. But then you started shifting in your career at some point. What point did this shift from being the criminal trial lawyer to doing the social work, and now what you do a lot of, which is the mindfulness advocacy? What was that transition? Because we've talked a little bit about the spiritual transition, and it sounded like the Taoism when you were in your early 30s and there was just a whole lot going on. There's a lot of chaos in your life and a lot of opportunity, but also you realized at some point you might need to rein that in. And the Taoism gave you a structure. It sounded like you really gravitated toward that structure. Like you said, it didn't make you believe anything. It just gave you some structure. So where did it go from there when you had that? Because if you're in the legal profession, there's a lot of structure there. A lot of things you can do, can't do. And then going into social work, it gets a little more gray because you are really working with people who are coloring outside the lines, and you have to help them figure out, okay, how do they live within the system? To mindfulness, which is much, much broader. So just walk us through that journey.
Okay. 88, I get to North Carolina. And all my career so far had been in criminal law. So the way that you get your feet on the ground is you get a job with the district attorney's office locally for a few years to get acclimated to the community. So that's what I did. And I worked as an assistant DA here in semi-rural Alamance County. And there's a lot of stories around how that went. But that was till about 95. And then I went out in private practice. When I was in the district attorney's office, I had extra time. I serendipitously, as so many things in our lives happen, a sheet or a notice came across that there was a meditation teacher training that was going to start up, and it was intense. I applied and they accepted me, and it was 2 years of sitting 30 minutes a day, watching a lot of videos, meeting many of the best meditation teachers in the country, silent retreats, 3 a year, week-long retreats. It was intense. So finally, I was certified as a meditation teacher. So between the process of the Taoism and the virtue and all of the values are things like humility and graciousness and generosity of spirit, and your life becomes that which you practice. So I was dealing with a lot of people that were in a lot of pain and suffering from their behaviors in criminal law. I was out in private practice now, and I kept seeing this revolving door. I would get to say they'd go off to jail, they'd be released, they'd offend again, come back. And I was thinking, what can I do to stop the revolving door? When this person comes into my presence, what is my responsibility to that person as a human being? Is it just to defend their behavior, or is it to leave them with something that's going to change the path of their life? I felt it was time for me to do something in that regard. So I closed my practice, went back and got my master's in social work so that I could treat them holistically, did a little stint as an addictions counselor, then opened my practice back up so I could take care of my folks holistically. And from that point on, I only represented indigent clients. That was
Wow.
just what I do, because by then I am studying Jesus's life and studying his teachings. And the phrase that appealed to me the most is, if you take care of the least of these, take care of me. And
Yeah.
so that was what I decided that I wanted to do with my life, is just to take care of the least of them. And believe me, folks that are incarcerated and are poor are the least of us. Mental health, addiction, anger, all of those things. So I started doing that, and I also started representing parents whose children had been taken away by social services. And meanwhile, I'm circulating in a middle-class white community. And so, my people were not exactly the people of my neighbors.
Man, it's on so many levels where you cross over between the different philosophies, like we started the conversation on, and now you're crossing over into the different types of communities, hoping to make a difference. And that's really beautiful, but it seems like it all comes back to what you learned early on and being able to meld the different religious philosophy. And we call it religion, but sometimes it's just practices. And I guess a religion is something that you believe and practice over and over. But you're bringing together what you see based on your value system as the best parts of all of it. And then you're going out and you're actually doing it with the social work, because those clients were great repeat business, right? You could have gone, it was job security. You could have just said, okay, you only got a probation or whatever. We'll see you next month, and kept riding that forever. But you said, you know what? If I'm going to make a difference, I have to do something pretty radical. So that's what you did. You went back, got a master's degree in social work. What did you learn in that period of time when you went from defending criminals into really helping them change their circumstance, not just get them a lower sentence or get them off completely, but really change the fundamental thing that got them there in the first place? What was the most powerful lesson for you there?
People need to be heard.
Okay.
If someone came to me and they had committed some serious matter like an armed robbery or the like, chances are I wasn't going to keep them out of prison. 90% or more of the ones that are accused with felonies get convicted. There are a lot of checks and balances in the system where folks that are innocent get kicked out of the system. I don't mean they get dismissed and kicked out, and the
Right.
DA doesn't want to waste time on cases they can't win. And of course, there are the few that get through and they're innocent as well. But for the most part, I wasn't going to keep them from going to prison or being on probation. But if they could leave my presence knowing that they have been heard, that they have been believed, that whatever is happening to them, they understand why it's happening, and they understand the bigger picture and why it's fair. If they can leave my presence and go off to whatever their sentence is, having been validated, the chances of them coming back, I believed, were less. And the biggest problem is that people go through life and don't feel heard. You've probably run into people that are talking to you and they'll repeat the same thing over and over. It's because when they were growing up, nobody listened to them and they had to say the same thing over and over until somebody finally heard them. If you can just sit back and listen to somebody from a while and let them know that you heard them, repeat back perhaps what they said so they know that they were heard and understood, it makes a huge difference in folks' lives. So that was, I guess, my mission. I wasn't going to enrich them, and they weren't going to be any more wealthy, and they still had to pay the consequences of their actions, but at least that they could feel heard.
Okay. Through that experience, you said you did a stint as an addictions counselor. When was it that you connected mindfulness to being something really helpful for people in that situation where maybe they did have an addiction that was controlling them, or they had obsessive thinking or unhelpful habits? At what point did you start to recognize the things that you had already learned for yourself would be applicable to people in that situation?
Can I answer that by going into what meditation is and what it's not?
I think that would be helpful. It's always good to have a recap because some folks do have very different ideas of what that could be. Yeah.
A lot of people think that meditation is about quieting the mind or about finding inner peace and tranquility. That is the practice. And that happens, but it happens the way in a football game you do plays and your job is to execute the play. And sometimes you happen to get a touchdown, but it's about executing the play. It's not about the touchdown. So yes, those benefits that everybody talks about, they come in practice, but they're not the focus of the practice. The focus of the practice is learning how to wake up from the default mind mush that we go through life with. You know how people say they drive a car and half an hour goes by because all these thoughts are just flowing through your head. And that's what in mindfulness we call being asleep, being in default mode. But you notice that the moment you're driving along, a car gets a little bit too close and all of a sudden, bam, your attention, you wake up, but now you're paying attention. So the difference between default and attention is like waking up. So what we do in meditation is we teach people a practice where they intentionally go into default mode and then wake up from it, and then return and start again and go into default mode and wake up from it, and do this practice over and over so that they can begin to identify and feel what being awake feels like. All you do is, form an intention to pay attention to your breath. And then when your mind wanders, at some point you'll notice that it wanders. That's waking up. And then just return your attention to your breath. Your mind will wander, and that's what it does, because back in the days when we were evolving, we had to always scan the environment for danger. So you're always scanning and taking in information. And that information consciously becomes just like patter, and it's combined with thoughts and the like, and it's just how our brain just goes and goes. But then all of a sudden you wake up. It's like when you're in a conversation with someone and then you notice that you stop listening. That is the practice of meditation. It's like the conversation is paying attention to your breath, and then you stop paying attention to your breath, and then you wake up from not paying attention to your breath and you go back. It also teaches us that we have the ability to observe the functioning of our brain. So the question that I always ask my new students is, so you had a thought, okay? You had a thought. Who is it that had the thought? That's our language, had a thought.
Yes.
So who is having the thought? Who is the generator of the thoughts? When you think about thoughts, they are nowhere, and then they arrive, and they exist, and then they go away, and they're replaced by another thought. And it's like, boom, bloop, boom, bloop. So who's generating all that? From a spiritual place, you might say that's our soul. From a psychological, you might say it's our subconscious. You might say it's our true self from a holistic perspective. We call it the observer most often because it's a neutral word. So there is this observer that begins to watch the mind wander and watch the waking up and watch the returning. So now we're beginning to get familiar with the observer. In my opinion, and in my experience, the observer is the fountain of all goodness. It is the human spirit in its best clothing. But we've covered it over with so much conditioning from society. It's like a blackboard that was beautifully black when it started, but then you put the chalk on it and erase, chalk, erase, chalk, erase. Down there is still that deep, dark blackboard. That beautiful blackboard, but it's covered up by all of these things that had been written and erased.
It's really hazy at that point.
So now we just want to get back. And then what you start doing in time with this practice, you start to get more connected to your observer, and you start to make friends with this deep you that is the fountain of all wisdom. Jung would say it is the antenna for the collective consciousness.
Okay.
It is what connects us to all of the universe.
Yeah.
And we have lost contact with it because of the conditioning that we have gone through, which is not wrong. It's just how things work. And there's no judgment that's saying this is better than that. But if you want to get connected back to your true self, to that fountain, that connection, that antenna that connects you with the universe, you got to start to clean the blackboard up.
It's almost a paradox in this day and age, in this time that we live in right now, because we have so much access to these teachings, these methods, and it's easy enough to get the information and maybe even start the practice. But on the flip side, it is so easy to be distracted as much as you want. Pick up your phone and you don't have to think another thought for yourself all day if you choose that. Do you think it's gotten much more difficult to be mindful on purpose? What's your opinion of the state of things right now in terms of information overload and the way people live their lives in contrast to what you're trying to teach them?
It's like being on the surface of the ocean and floating in a little rowboat on the surface of the ocean. And if it's a nice, calm day, you feel nice and calm. And if it's not a nice, calm day and it's choppy, you feel a little bit anxious. And if a hurricane comes, you're just in fear and you're tossed about by the waves and you're subject to all the stuff that comes. You're not aware of the fact that 20 feet down where you really live, everything is calm. But you're so up here on the surface, and that has become your entire world, that it's hard. It's a hard life. That's tough.
Wow.
With the technology, it becomes tougher and tougher. So I am forever grateful that I have practiced. And I mean, I get angry and I get pissed off and I get sad and I grieve and I have the full boat of emotions. And at the same time, there is that little me that's 20 feet underneath the surface of the water that's still calm. And my observer is watching me be angry. So in the anger, I'm angry, but the observer's not. It's kind of, I love what the Irish say about emotions. They don't say I'm sad or I'm happy. They say happiness is upon me.
Yeah.
Which recognizes that it's just something that's here for the moment and it's going to be gone in the moment. And then sadness will be upon you and grief will be upon you. And that's just life.
Yeah. Tell me about some of the light bulb moments that have happened with some of your students as you're helping them understand this practice of the observer, and maybe some of the breakthroughs that you've seen happen from teaching this to other people.
Teaching meditation from the classical perspective is not American. Saying drop into a class, do it for 2 years, sit for 30 minutes, that ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
I must have been nuts to do it. But Duke University, fortunately, they did years of research because they were trying to find something to help their Duke students not be so anxious. So the health department, the counseling department, the psychology department, and the statistics department all collaborated for years to develop a program that could teach the basics of meditation in 4 weeks.
Okay.
1 hour of instruction a week, 10 minutes of practice a day. They developed a technological app and infrastructure for teaching it. And I went and got certified in that. And it has been wonderful because it works.
Whoa. Okay.
I can take somebody and I can promise you that if you engage with this program in 4 weeks, you will understand what meditation is. You will have experienced it. You will have gotten some anxiety reduction techniques, and you'll be able to make an intelligent decision about whether you want to practice it. I can't say you're going to make you an expert in 4 weeks, but there's that. In the first 2 weeks, mostly the students are, I couldn't focus because the dog was barking. And see, they do 10 minutes of practice, then they log it. And every morning the log comes to my dashboard and I get to answer it. So before they meditate again, they get coaching from me every day for 4 weeks.
Oh, that's great.
And that's what works. So the first 2 weeks is always, I couldn't meditate. I couldn't do it because my dog was barking. It distracted me. So I get to say, no, you did great. You noticed that the bark of the dog was distracting. You noticed that it made you angry. You noticed this. You noticed that. Good job. So there's no discouragement. After a couple of weeks, I get things like, I just noticed that there are crickets outside my window. I came home from school. It was a really bad day. and I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't do my work. I couldn't do my homework. So I did my 10 minutes instead, and then I could do my homework. A Fortune 500 CEO took the course, and he goes, "Oh, so that's what I'm thinking. I never realized how much planning I do, and none of it is helpful." So the moment you take the time to watch your mind is a light bulb moment for anyone.
Yeah.
The moment you realize that you have some say about what you think, because most of us just, we think what we think, and then that becomes our reality. I used to play a game with my son out of all of this, and it was challenge the first thought. One day we're out to eat, and this waitress comes over, and she's all bubbly, and "Hi, I'm so, and I'm going to be your waitress." And he says, "Oh, she's really bucking for a tip." See, that was his first thought, and that became his reality. That's what the truth is. So it's time for me to challenge it now. This might be a little off color. Do you mind?
No, go for it.
So I said to him, "Yeah, maybe she got some last night." And he goes, "Okay, game on." So maybe she's a university student and her parents just bought her a car.
Yeah.
So now we're going back and forth looking at all of the possibilities of what the truth could be,
Yeah.
which helps you to diminish the idea that my first thought is the truth.
Yes.
That gives you the flexibility to be able to listen.
That's powerful because it's like you said, people who are hurting the most, they just want to be listened to. Over the course of this conversation, I'm seeing the pattern in your life and your career in terms of when you were trial attorney, you were working one-to-one with your clients to get them out of a situation they didn't want to be in. Then you saw that you were successful in doing that, but you maybe weren't making the impact you wanted. So then you went into the social work where you're still kind of working one-to-one, but maybe one-to-one and it affects the larger family unit at that point. So you're making a little broader impact with the people you are working with. Now in your work, you've gone what I call one-to-many, where you're teaching students at Elon University, either through the law or ethics courses that you teach, but you're also teaching the mindfulness, the meditation courses. And now you are teaching that to many of them, but also that's going to not just get them out of a situation, it's going to carry over into their lives more broadly. It's going to carry over into what they do next, into their careers. Your reach has gotten so much wider over the last 4 decades, it sounds like.
As a good rabbi friend of mine would say, from your lips to God's ears.
I just want to call that out and thank you for being a huge part of what's trying to make the world a better place. Thank you for that, because it's important to acknowledge when people are doing important work. Sounds like you couldn't have stayed in Miami, but you could have just stuck with getting people out of jams, out of really important and serious life-changing situations, but you saw a greater need and you stepped up. So that's amazing.
I appreciate your saying that.
Where do you see it going with you and what you want people to know about meditation, about mindfulness? What do you see happening next in the next iteration of what you do?
I wrote the book that's just been published by Kendall Hunt as a Rosetta Stone. It's an act of love for my wife, but it turned out to be much more. But what I'm seeing is that the people that read it, it makes a difference in their lives, because there are so many people that are stuck in the dogma of one belief system. And when they begin to see that the same truths that they honor are reflected in other spiritual traditions, that's one way of breaking that little, what do they call them, silos. There are political silos, but there's also spiritual silos. And it doesn't matter whether it's a political or a belief or which news media you watch. Whatever the silo is, you break one, you learn how to break others. So right now, my interest is getting that into the hands of more people, because it's making a difference. And I've seen the difference it makes. I'm 74 years old, and the credit card points that you get that you can save to get hotel rooms.
Oh, yeah.
We've been saving those for a whole bunch of years, and we got a lot of them. And my wife is telling me that May of 75, she's going to force me to stop. I'll be 75 years old, and we want to travel a bit. The nice thing about it is I can always continue teaching meditation, because we do that online. And I can go anywhere and be anywhere and still do that.
I would definitely want to talk about your book. And the one you're talking about is I Am the Way. that you
Yes.
wrote, and that was to decode all of the things you learned about Taoism and Buddhism and how it dovetails in, I guess you could say, to a lot of her Christian beliefs. And at the same time, you're taking what we were talking about just a second ago. You're going from one to many with the classes, and now you're going to one to many with a book, because once you put a book out there, anyone could have access to it who is interested in getting this type of understanding. So we know what the impetus for the book was, because you wanted to explain to your wife, but you realized she's not the only one, and I could get this message out to a lot more people. What was the progression from the idea of the book, and how long did it take to go through and put all of those principles down and get them organized to a point where you felt like, okay, that's good. I think people can understand this complex issue in however many hundreds of pages it took to explain it.
It 4 years.
Okay.
It was 4 years. And the process, of course, like the Tao Te Ching, which has been translated from Chinese by great authors like Stephen Mitchell, is 81 short one-page chapters. You might even call them poems or meditations.
Okay.
And they're written in that kind of Chinese Confucius-like, very packed with a lot in each word, very pithy, very short and the like. And so I tried to maintain that same cadence and feel and look. So I would see something, for instance, Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching, would write that leadership is something to be accepted hesitatingly, and that if you are called to leadership, that his advice would always be to do what's necessary to be done and then to step down. And that way you put the focus on the work and not on yourself, that your work will endure. But the moment you stick around too long, your ego gets in the way, and then it starts to be something of pride and fame and the like. But of course, he says all that in 2 lines. When your work is done, step down. Okay. So now how would you translate that into a Christian perception? We take a look at the life of Jesus. He did his work and then he ascended. He came and did what was necessary to do, and then he stepped down. According to the Bible, if you believe in the reincarnation, that he came back and he could have stayed around forever.
Sure.
Right? There's no reason that he had to ascend. He could have stayed around, but being a wisdom teacher knew that his work was done. And it's time for me to get me out of it and let the disciples go out there and take care of it. Otherwise, it's going to be all about me. And then when I die, it's over. So time for me just to step down and turn it over. You could take those few words of the Tao Te Ching and then use a few words. So Jesus did his work and then ascended. That would be that translation. So when Connie read it, she goes, yeah, I get that. And after I'd done a good portion of it, she turned to me once and she said, no preacher has ever explained Jesus to me that well. So it completely focuses on the teachings, and there's no dogma. There's no organized religion around it. It's just the teachings, just the values, just you talk your podcast, A Joyful Rebellion, right?
Yeah.
Think about Jesus. He came, and what he did was he brought a new operating system. The operating system was, if somebody hurts you, hurt them back, an eye for an eye.
Yeah.
The Jewish system was forgive 7 times. This was your obligation as a good Jewish person. And he said, nah, not 7, 7 times 70. The whole operating system, just like Macs are a different operating system from PCs. This was a whole different way of looking at life. When you look at the Beatitudes, he was describing not something fanciful. He was giving you what the manual says life would be like if you followed his way. And the name of my book is I Am the Way, because the word Tao means the way.
The way.
And he said, I am the way.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah, it folds into each other. That's pretty great. Once the book came out, what's some of the feedback you got from people outside of your wife, who was probably looking pretty closely? And I'm sure you used her as a sounding board. And once it did come back, what did you get from complete strangers?
So in my church, there are 2 adult Sunday schools. One of them is the pastors, which is typical, looking at the historical Jewish tribes, etc. And we have another one, which I attend, which is called The Seekers. And everybody in there will identify as a recovering something.
Right.
I'm recovering Southern Baptist, recovering Methodist, recovering this.
Yeah.
And these are all people that took some issue with the inerrancy of the Bible, that have taken issue with that. And in their, most of them are a little older. And they say, well, I was brought up believing the Bible's inerrant. And now I question that. Who am I and what am I? And so in that class, no question is an improper question. And we read all kinds of different aspects of interpreting the Bible and looking at different writers and the like. So I brought something to that class. But once the book was going to be published, I asked, how often do you get to be in a Sunday school with the author?
Right. Yeah.
So everybody said, yeah, okay. And so we've been doing my book for the past month or so.
Okay.
The most common reactions, what we do in classes, we just come in and says, what did somebody read this week? And somebody will say, I really like this little thing here. And I really like this. And this was really cool. And people will read little couplets out of the book that had great meaning for them. So there's lots of stuff to be found in it. There's 81 chapters. And when I say chapters, it sounds like a lot, but 81 one-page meditations followed by some unpacking.
Okay.
Some commentary that I've written. And always at the end of it, there's a suggestion to how to bring it into your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super helpful. I like the fact that you say recovering from something in the Sunday school class, because that is a thing that I don't know. I'm assuming it runs through a lot of geographic areas. It runs through a lot of time frames. And I'm sure there are just as many recovering Catholics as there are recovering Pentecostals or something like that. But when you are talking to these folks who maybe got a little burned in their youth, or what they felt like their parents were trying to push on them from their generation or from their point of view, what are some of the themes that you see that span through all of these very different folks and their really different experiences? Is there one common theme that they all bring to that, quote, recovering, what, fill in the blank, whatever they were taught? And I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. So some people are angry and some people are a little scared and timid. And if I could just divert from the question for just a moment, tell you what really saddens me. The ever-increasing population of nuns, people that when asked their religious affiliation, they go, none.
Oh.
And I wasn't brought up in a church or anything else, and I see a lot of the pain and the trauma that has been caused by the misuse of religion. But nevertheless, it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They were hurt, or they say, you lied to me because the earth is more than 4,000 years old. So you lied to me. So I'm throwing the whole thing out. And that means they're throwing out the wisdom and the teaching and the life plans and all of the things that really give us joy. And there's so many out there that on Sunday, my wife, being the recovering Southern Baptist that she is, she goes, God only asks you for 1 hour a week. Well, I don't want to go to church. God only asks you for 1 hour a week. And it's true. No matter how busy you are, you could take an hour a week or 2 hours a week to go to a community that supports your sense of values. And there's so many out there that are not doing it. And what takes its place in that vacuum is all of the disinformation and all of the fear mongering and all of the craziness, or all of the apathy, or all of the anxiety and depression and all that stuff. You have to defend against that. There is so much that comes at you that batters you.
Yeah.
That if you don't intentionally take some action, brain science supports this. The right prefrontal cortex of your brain, and this is all meditation stuff, but that's generally much more active because there's where our survival in various aspects, survival is centered there. And that's our most powerful instinct, is survival. So everything that we have that is about fear or anxiety or this or the world's going to heck or democracy's going down, all that all stimulates the electrical activity in that side. And if they take your brain scan or my brain scan and they see more electrical activity in the right side with better than an 80% accuracy, they can predict that you're pessimistic, that you'll see the glass as half empty, that you're critical, that you're cynical. All of those things based on electrical activity. So if you don't build up electrical activity in the left side of your prefrontal cortex, you're going to be unbalanced. But that doesn't happen because you're not fed enough. Society doesn't feed it enough. You have to take the horse by the reins, and you have to intentionally do stuff that gives you joy. You have to practice awe. You have to go out and walk in the forest. You have to take the time to fill yourself with beauty. You have to take your environment and put pictures of it that bring you happiness and elevate your heart. You have to feed your left side brain so that it balances out all the stuff that comes at you naturally. And if you don't, you look at so many people who walk around with hard faces.
Yeah.
But don't get me started.
Bob, this has been a great conversation. If someone is curious about going a little further in their mindfulness or meditation practice, or maybe they want to explore a little more about the philosophies, the religion, they find themselves maybe a little disaffected by the way they were brought up, and they want to get curious about how it was you came to blend these philosophies together in a way that has done great things for you in your life, in your community. How would they get in touch with you to find out more?
Of course, my book has a website, IamTheWayBook.com. I have a meditation website, awiseandhappylife.com/meditation.
And I'll have all of that on the show notes. If you're at all interested, check it out. I'm looking at the page right now. It's got a lot of good info and really easy to get in touch with you. Is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about today?
You asked me that a lot of times people get into the practice, but then it fades. And most everybody these days is getting into meditation on an app. And I'm going to say this hands down, flat out, full stop, period. There's nothing like a coach.
Okay.
You can find me or you can find a coach that you connect with. But in terms of meditation and learning meditation, you can't beat a coach. You just can't beat a coach.
Because you get that feedback like you described with one of your students. They said, hey, the dog was barking and I just couldn't do it. And you said, no, you actually did it. And an app can't tell you that.
Can't tell you that.
You're right. That's really valuable because that probably caught them off guard. When you told them, you noticed that the dog was barking and you noticed it affected what you were trying to do. And
good job.
Exactly. And go do it again. And they were like, wait, what? If we're still using the football analogy, they thought they were supposed to be making a touchdown and you were just asking them to run the play. I have no idea what that means. I don't do sports, but I do get it. If you're just run the process, it's people who talk a little more about process over results. And with mindfulness, it's all about the process and the results eventually happen. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for the time you took today to explain all of this. I think it's so amazing, your career transition from where you started and where you are now, just affecting so many people's lives in a positive way. So thank you for that work.
And James, thank you for what you do. You're a wonderful host.
Oh, thank you.
I would do this for fun.
It was
this
fun.
Was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. And it's fun to give people a different perspective. I love to do that. Even when I was a photographer, I always was striving to show people the world in a way they had never seen it before. Even if we were standing right beside each other and looking at the same thing, I would want to make sure I was at an angle or catch it in such a way that I could show them if it was a picture of themselves or if it was a picture of what we were both looking at, and they would look and say, wow, I didn't see it that way. And that's so true of everything in life. It's like your wife didn't see your perspective until you showed it to her, and you blended that with what she believed as well. And that becomes powerful when you can show somebody a different perspective in a way that's not threatening to them. So that's what I love to do with the podcast. And
well, you just said when I was a photographer, and I don't think that you can unbecome a photographer.
That's true. I keep doing it. Can't get away.
Can't get away.
Keeps pulling me back.
My brother's a Marine. He's 83 years old, and I always correct myself. Once a Marine, always a Marine.
That's right. Bob, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will look forward to being in touch really soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining me today. And if you have an extra minute, I have a favor to ask. Some of you listen to this show on Apple Podcasts, and a lot of you I talk to are on Spotify or Amazon. I'd love it if you would take just a second to leave a rating or a review. It lets the platforms know that listeners are getting value from the show, and suggest it to others who are interested in similar content. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a guest suggestion, or just general feedback, I'd love to hear about that too. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at ajoyfulrebellion.com.